Live from Radio Row in Indianapolis, it's Combine time as teams look for their next superstar. Some of the biggest names in sports and entertainment will be right here. Get ready for the 2025 draft, baby. It's the Jake Asman Show.
All right, we're back here at Radio Row, and joining us right now is the last Jets general manager to lead this team to the playoffs, Mike Tannenbaum from ESPN and the 33rd. Mike, appreciate you coming on.
Good to see you.
All right, I have a lot of questions for you because you know I live and die with the New York Jets. You were intimately involved in the search for Aaron Glenn and Darren Mougey. Can you take us back to the beginning when it all kind of came together, how you and Rick Spielman and everyone at the 33rd team started to compile the list of names, like the process to actually determine the candidates you wanted to speak to, because you guys spoke to more candidates than any team with openings this offseason.
Yeah, it was a great process, and very fortunate that, Woody, Christopher, and Jaime Elhai gave us the opportunity. We just said, hey, let's make this a data-driven approach. And, to be candid, what's the downside to talking to candidates? Like, I know that was out there, but every time somebody left the room, we learned something. And, ultimately our role in the play was to set things up, collect great information, and, have Woody, Christopher, and Jaime make decisions. And, I thought the process was great. I mean, it was funny as it was ending, like the emotion I was having was like sadness. Like, it was a great working environment. We had a lot of fun. We learned a lot. I think we were very, very thorough. And I'm just a big believer, as Nick Saban would say, if you don't like the result, look at the process. And, that was the one thing we could control was the process. And we worked really hard at it, and excited by the results we got.
So I agree with the interview as many people as possible, but for the life of me, I just didn't understand why you look at a guy like Pete Carroll, who was out there, Mike McCarthy, who became available as you guys were really ramping up the interview process. John Gruden is interested in getting back in. No team even spoke with him. You guys are going to talk with so many different people. Why not talk to guys with rings on their fingers who have won Super Bowls, of course?
Yeah, we vetted the list. We looked at different variables, and at the end of the day, like, we were really comfortable with the list. Like, there were a lot of great candidates out there, the ones you mentioned and others. And ultimately, we just felt comfortable with the guys we had.
So, at what point during the process did you realize, hey, we might have something here with Aaron Glenn?
Yeah, that's a great question. It just kind of happens, and for me, like, it's a really unique situation. That was like the third time that I had an affiliation with the Jets in doing something with Aaron. Once as a player, I remember we got to franchise him. It's really funny. Like, there's a lot about the Parcells connection. And Bill was a big, still to this day, like, we talk about team building and prototypes. And I remember early on, like, the size and the physicality of, what we wanted in corners, and Aaron's contract's up. And I'm like, well, what are we going to do here? And he's like, well, we're going to franchise him. I'm like, well, he doesn't fit. And early on, just about his character, his competitiveness, his toughness. And the other thing that really stood out to me about Aaron was going back to 2012, he scouted for us. And I think, like, one of the ways you can assess somebody is...
You gave him his start as a scout.
Yeah, was the quality of someone's questions. And he would ask the best questions. And so, look, I've known Aaron, it's like 28 years. And he's the same guy. So, like, for me, the process was more almost like validating things that, at least some of the things I knew, and certainly for the group, I think each one could speak for themselves, but I think they all saw the same things.
How important or how big of a factor is it that he does know the organization? He knows the owner. He was a player here. He was a scout here. He understands for a first-time coach, because that was my big thing, Mike. I was very worried with any first-timer stepping into this situation. Like, the Jet job is a lot different than maybe other jobs around the league, but because Glenn played and understands what he's getting into, I think he's not your typical first-time coach, if that makes sense. Like, how much of his background with the organization factored into the decision?
Yeah, Jake, what's kind of cool is there's now 5 current NFL head coaches who played for their teams. When you look at Mike Vrabel, DeMeco Ryans, Jim Harbaugh with the Chargers, and Dan Campbell in Detroit, those 5 guys actually played for the teams they're now the head coach of, which I think is a really cool thing, and I think it only helps with the learning curve.
So with Darren Mougey in particular, that was a name I follow football. I had never heard of Darren Mougey, and I think it's always tough for us as fans. Like, what does an assistant GM do? Because there's so many different roles in the front office that you obviously could speak to. Why was Darren Mougey someone you guys identified as a candidate? And then how far along into the process did it kind of stand out to you that he could be someone that could do this job?
Yeah, his resume really stood on its own. Like, went through like various changes of new head coaches, GMs, and ownership. And when someone keeps thriving and getting more responsibility, that says a lot about them. And, the plan he put together was compelling and detailed. And
are you guys asking candidates like, hey, what would you do? Like plan your off season? Like, is it like how detailed are we talking about? Like, you're vetting candidates, and it's like, hey, you say you put a plan together. Is that like, hey, you're day one on the job. What are you doing? What are you doing like this off season?
Yeah, well, the interviews are pretty detailed and they go in a lot of different directions. But he was clearly somebody that showed like great organization, great detail, very likable, great leadership. Had like a humility about him and confidence, which is a unique blend. And just again through the process, it was apparent. We felt really good about him.
Did you guys go into this process with an idea of Aaron Rodgers is not going to be the Jet quarterback? Like we hear that it was up to the new regime to make that decision. I really hope it was. You were in there. Can you verify that it was truly up to Glenn and Mougey what to do with Aaron Rodgers?
Yeah, again, we were brought in to run a search, that had to do with hiring a head coach and a GM.
You have to ask questions about Aaron Rodgers in the interview process now.
Well, we asked a lot of questions, but again, like, if you think about it like sequentially, like you have to hire a head coach and a GM, they have to put a staff together, they have to evaluate the roster, you have to evaluate where you are on the salary cap, how big is the salary cap going to be, what does free agency look like, what does the draft look like. So to even think about those things before really like right now is, and with that said, Jake, we're sitting here in late February, the free agency is still 2 weeks away, and I promise you, if we were sitting here 2 weeks from today, player X or Y may be available, Matt Stafford may sign an extension. Who knows what's going to happen? Abdul Carter yesterday morning looked like the first pick. Then maybe he needed surgery. Now it looks like he'll be there. So that's one of the fun parts about being in the NFL. Things are constantly changing.
But when you say you put together like an off-season plan, like is that for like that has to obviously include the quarterback? It's the most important position on the field.
You're talking about with Mougey in particular?
Yeah, like I'm like just like when you guys are going through the process, I'm just like I'm curious like how often the quarterback situation is discussed as you're vetting candidates to figure, because I mean that's been the biggest problem with this franchise in its history. They have not had that long time sustainable franchise quarterback.
Yeah, so it's really more about like the process about making decisions more than it is about any. You're hopefully making these 10-year hires, so you really want to get under the hood about how you go about making decisions, much more so than any decision you're going to make.
Mike, what are your thoughts on Rick Spielman now, of course, leaving you with the 33rd team and being involved full-time in Mougey's front office? Were you caught off guard by that at all? Like what was the conversations like with you and Rick when this was apparent that he might have this opportunity to join Darren with the Jets?
Yeah, no, I'm thrilled. Rick's great. He's become a really good friend, almost like a little bit of a mentor. He's had an unbelievable track record in the NFL for a really long time, starting all the way at the bottom as a Blesto scout, and I'm glad that it worked out for him and obviously for the Jets.
I mean, I know it's a full-time role, but like, is he like, does he have a lot of influence in like decision making? Like, we're talking about a first-time GM. Rick is obviously well experienced. How big is his voice in decision making now for the Jets?
Yeah, I'm not there, so I don't know, but I'm thrilled that he's there, and I'm sure they'll use him, and I'm sure it'll be a great resource.
Would you have considered the same type of role if Mougey wanted to hire you?
Yeah, no, I'm comfortable.
I'm happy with ESPN. I love it, Mike. So,
are you asking me or telling me?
Well, I knew you were gonna give me that answer, which is fine. I appreciate it. As far as like now, you obviously evaluated the Jets roster and what went on last year. What to you are the big things that Darren and Aaron have to do right away to try and change things so the Jets could be a playoff team for the first time since you were GMing back in 2010?
Jake, first thing, I don't think the cupboard's bare, and I don't think many of the candidates we talked to for either head coach or GM felt that way. Like, I think people came in with a very honest, sober opinion. I know Aaron Rodgers, for obvious reasons, is going to get a lot of the headlines, but beyond that, like, a lot of people felt really good about the roster. So, look, I'm excited to watch him go to work. I think this, and everyone's judged, we're in the media, one-loss record, but I think the indices of a team being well-coached will be very apparent quickly, like the conditioning of this team, how it's managed, at the end of the halves, penalties, things like that. I think this team will be improved. Like, I have no idea what the record's going to be, obviously, but there's good foundational pieces from, I think, players up front on both sides of the ball, and I'm really confident that Aaron's going to come in because of Dan Campbell, Sean Payton, Bill Parcells, and come in, and this team is going to look like an Aaron Glenn team, which is, again, they're going to be tough, they're going to be competitive. But I think, Jake, you're going to sit there and say, like, well, that's a well-coached team. And look, we both know, like, there will be weeks the ball won't bounce that way. There'll be a 3-game losing streak. But I think when you look, at the season, I think by the end of it, you'll feel like, boy, the trajectory is going in the right direction.
Well, to me, the big thing is, like, this team hasn't made the playoffs in 14 years. haven't won a division title. So I had Chet Pennington on yesterday, your old quarterback. I mean, he was the quarterback the last time a division title was won. They haven't won more than 7 games, Mike, in a decade. It's just we're just beaten down as fans. Like, I understand that these guys aren't they're not responsible for the 14-year playoff drought, but it's like, it's going to be tough to sell this fan base on having the right people if this team goes out there and wins, 4 or 5 games next season.
Yeah, and again, I don't have no idea how many games they're going to win, but I think everyone's going to be like, okay, these are the right guys. Things are going the right direction, and I'm really excited to see them, like the impact they'll have.
So Darren was asked questions about extending players on their rookie deals after 3 seasons. Garrett Wilson's up for a new deal. Sauce Gardner's up for a new deal. When you were a GM, what was your philosophy on that? And do you have any idea on Darren's philosophy in regards to those players?
Yeah, so to be clear, I don't know what they're going to do. And look, I think the balance is like you want to keep and retain those good young players. With that said, you also want to make sure you're opportunistic in, free agency. So it's hard. It's really hard. I mean, you could look at the Dallas Cowboys, for example. They have some great players in Dak Prescott, CeeDee Lamb, Trayvon Diggs, and now they're going to have to figure out what to do with Micah Parsons. You start stacking up 5, 6, 7 of those, it's hard to do other things.
Woody Johnson yesterday received like an F in the NFLPA report cards. I ask you about Woody because you know him, you worked for him, he brought you in to help with this process. He has said publicly, hey, I need to be a better owner. Do you get a sense that Woody is truly going to allow these 2 people that he hired, Mougey and Glenn, to do their job, give them the resources for whatever they need?
Yeah, look, I worked for him for 16 years. We had a great run. I hold him in the highest regard. You walk into that building, like you have all the resources there. And certainly, and Damian Woody made this comment earlier today on ESPN when we were on. He's like, you look at the team, like they were desperately trying to win. I mean, if you want to criticize, you can say maybe they should have go after, another high-priced veteran. So, like, I saw that report, and maybe there were other reasons for that, Jake. Obviously, I wasn't there every day, but my gosh, like the way they comported themselves, like I thought it was like the opposite. Like they were trying to do everything they could, to win, to keep, Saleh and Rodgers going.
Well, when they talk about, the food being bad or the facilities, like, I've been in a couple NFL facilities, not as much as you, but like that's a state-of-the-art facility. So that feels like sour grapes.
Yeah. Again, and maybe part of that was like they felt, loyalty to Robert Saleh. He's not there anymore. So who knows what all the reasons are. But like you said, you've been in the building. It's a beautiful state-of-the-art building. And again, more fundamentally, like there can't be a player that walks in there that said all the moves they made, they were desperately trying to win.
Right. I mean, you look at now this draft, they're in a unique spot with that 7th pick. Do you see Darren, Mougey, Aaron Glenn? Do they love one of these quarterbacks? Could they actually make the move and trade up for them? I mean, if you were, you were the GM, you made bold, aggressive moves, and that led to a lot of success. Do you think Darren Mougey has a little Tannenbaum in him and would actually trade up for a quarterback?
Well, I hope he doesn't have my appetite. So let's start there. Look, I think they'll do what they think is the right long-term move. And if we sat here and they traded up, I wouldn't be surprised. But likewise, like if they signed a veteran quarterback, maybe they trade back in year 1 and try to acquire, as many picks as possible. With 7 teams making the playoffs, things change a lot every year. I forgot what the stat is, but on average over the last decade, Jake, I think 3 or 4 new teams every year make.
I give the stat it's never the Jets, but it's 4 new teams on average that didn't make it the previous year, make it the following year.
Yep. So again, there's a really good foundation here. All the oxygen and the headlines will be about the quarterback position. They'll make other moves as well, but I could see them. I'm sure that quarterback position will be addressed. I'm not saying they'll be aggressive from day one, but I'm sure they're paying attention to that.
Well, when you made the trade up for Mark Sanchez, can you walk my audience through what that process was like, how you identified Mark as the guy that you guys wanted to move up and make that deal?
Well, first of all, you have to be prepared, Jake. So, I remember borrowing, cajoling Matt Stafford's agent, like, hey, we want to get in front of Matt. And he's like, what are you talking about? You're picking 17. I'm like, well, we are today. But, that's not going to be where we're going to be. And it took us a while to get to 5, but we were able to get to 5, gave up 3 players, 2 picks, and obviously that worked out well.
How did you pull that deal off, though? Because you guys didn't trade any future first-round picks, and now we see trades today in the NFL where if you're going up from 17 to 5, you're trading at least next year's first-round pick in that deal.
Yeah, I think, like for me, like try to be a good listener, understand what the other side wants, and try to figure out, a landing spot that works.
Are you on the phone with Mangini making that deal too, by the way?
Yeah.
Is that awkward at all after what happened in 08?
Yeah, I went to see him and clear the air. I just feel like that's the right way to do things. It's just, hey, let's just sit down and talk things out. And, there's things we both could have done better. And, life's short and neither one of us is going to retire in the NFL. And, life's about relationships. So let's sit down and have a talk.
It's just that's the dynamic there. No one brings that up that you had to make the deal with the coach that you just basically fired and replaced with Rex.
Yeah, you bring over a bottle of wine, you sit down, have some family business, and clear the air and move on.
How about that? A couple quick hitters for you. So I think in Jet history, you're very underrated for some of these trades we're talking about. And Darrelle Revis being another trade that you had to make to move up in the draft. When did you know, hey, Darrelle Revis is the guy we need to go out there and trade up for?
Yeah, the night before the draft. Well, there was 3 corners that year. Aaron Ross and Leon Hall from Michigan and Texas were the other 2 that we liked, but Darrelle was clearly above. So I had a great relationship with Marty Herney, the general manager of the Panthers. We went from 25 to 14. And we had an agreement in principle the night before. I just said, hey, there's one player. We're coming for him. And I don't want you to hold me up and I have to pay more, when you're on the clock. Likewise, I'm not going to try to come for less. We had the exact deal. It was done. It took 2 seconds.
Wow.
And Darrelle was a Jet. And I knew exactly how it was going to go. And it worked out, ideally. And it was because we could have a handshake on a trade and it was done. And we could trust Carolina and Marty Herney. And it was, the trade actually worked out pretty well for them if you track the players they got. So it was a win-win.
How do you how do you just determine that Revis was that level of player? Like what characteristics stood out to you that you felt comfortable making that move?
Yeah, it was the workout he had. And Terry Bradway, I'll never forget, called me from the airport after his workout at Pittsburgh. He's like, there's no way he'll be there at 25 based on his workout. But that year he came out, 1, he declared late, and 2, there were not a lot of good receivers that he went against. So the question marks about Darrelle were question marks about just incomplete. Like a lot more work had to be done on him. And then secondly, he just didn't go against a lot of good receivers.
Got to ask you about Rex, obviously. I mean, was it tough telling him that this job that he was campaigning for, he loves? I mean, I had him on DNR and he's telling me that he wants this job more than anything. Was it tough to obviously take the interview with him and then have to break the news to him that, hey, we're going in a different direction?
Yeah, no, he understood, and we're friends, and he had an at bat, a meaningful one, and obviously it didn't go his way, but he has a lot of great gifts, and if he wants to coach, hopefully that'll work out for him sooner than later.
Do you think that he'd have to go back as a DC first to essentially try and get an opportunity to be a head coach again?
You never say never. If you asked me, 6 months ago with Pete Carroll ever coach again, I'd be like, well, you never.
How about Brian Schottenheimer getting the Cowboys job?
Yeah, you never know. So, I would say if Rex wants to coach, go back and coach, but he's obviously doing a great job at ESPN as well.
I get asked all the time, would Rex have been a DC for the Jets? And I mean, Rex, but I just can't see Rex's ego allowing him to be a DC for a franchise that the last time they were any good, you and him were a part of it. I couldn't picture it. Do you think Rex would ever be open to being the DC of the New York Jets?
You would have to ask him that, but he has a lot of great gifts as a coach that we've all seen.
Congrats to your son as well. Can you tell the audience where your son is playing college football?
Yeah, probably, Jake. He'll be a member of the North Carolina Tar Heels as a long snapper. So never thought, A, he'd be able to play, which is great for him, and B, who he's playing for. In a million years did I ever think that would happen.
Was Thomas Hennessy with the Jets when you were still there?
No.
So I guess you just missed him. But he's like the longest tenured player in the Jets. He's been with the most consistent long snapper in the league.
Yeah, that's great.
So congrats to your son, Mike. That's awesome. I appreciate you doing this, answering some questions on the process. It's enlightening for the audience, and continued success. I know you're here all week with ESPN on Get Up and all the shows, so we'll be watching.
All right, thanks so much.
He's Mike Tannenbaum. My name is Jake Asman. Quick break. We'll continue. Jake Asman with you, live from the NFL Combine here at Radio Row in Indy.